In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about building a plan for a model-driven app versus just building the model-driven app, who I think this process is mainly for, and some potential issues you might run into if you use this. Now, what did I do for this particular video? I basically used this plan. I put a pretty robust plan together. If we scroll up here, you'll see that I went through tables and roles and audit logs, quite a lot of stuff that I considered when I put this plan together. And then we have the user processes, which I thought were pretty good. I didn't really edit too much on the user processes. And then the data model. It made some interesting choices for the data model. I did go ahead and just let it kind of do its thing. I modified a few things. It didn't catch all the lookup tables that I was looking for. It didn't really capture the tax category and tax subcategory, as well as how I wanted to capture the mileage correctly, the way that I actually told it to. So there were some definite differences between what I asked for and what I actually got in terms of the table structure. In some cases, I actually let it do its thing just to see what it came up with for that process. And I also asked for specific automations to make sure that mileage rates and things like that were being updated correctly within the data tables. None of that was possible for the app to do. It was unable to create any of the automations that I had asked for. All of them I was able to create without any problems. So there's definitely a limitation on what kind of automations the application can create. So what was the final product? What did this look like when it was done? Let's check that out now. All right, so this is essentially what it came up with. It came up with a flat structure here. It did create a lot of the tables I was looking for. I actually didn't want mileage trips. I wanted that to be part of the expenses, but it decided to do a table for trips, which I'm great with the relational databases. I actually built quite a few of them. In this particular build, I actually asked for it to incorporate it into the expenses table. I like keeping kind of the expenses all together when it's that kind of an expense. I could see a benefit of having some sort of a trips table where it's more like business trip data and that kind of stuff, where it's its own kind of category of expense. I could see some benefits in doing that. In this case, in the design of this particular application, I was looking more in terms of like typical business expenses of buying different resources or services. That's really what I was kind of gearing this application to. And same thing with the revenue table. It's more of a flat table. It does have these lookups, obviously, for the customers and who you're paying, and then obviously all these categories. I thought those were best as lookups. And I would also say that some of the choice columns that I'd asked for weren't actually choice columns. They were just text columns, so I ended up having to recreate a lot of that. But it's not bad if you're really brand new to model-driven apps or application development. This is not terrible. It's not unusable, but it isn't what I actually asked for, and it didn't create any of the automations that would make some of this work a little bit better for the user. For example, if you're going to go ahead and use a trips table like this, you'd want to be able to pull that data together in a usable dashboard, and you'd like to be able to have automations between the rates and the trips, and then linkages between the expense table and your trips. It didn't do most of that. Now, some of that I could have done as part of the build of the data layout, and in some cases I did. I did put the lookup column between the expenses and the trips. But again, you had to do quite a bit of customization in the actual building of the plan in order to get anywhere near what you asked for. Even if you were very specific of, I want a choice column and here are the choices, I got a text column in that case. Or if I asked for a lookup column between these two tables, there was no lookup column created. It did do the lookups for the categories and the subcategories, but it didn't create that cascading relationship that I was looking for. So if you select a category, you should only see the subcategories associated with the higher category. It didn't create any of that logic. And I also didn't see a way to interject that into the plan. So that would be something you would have to consider for doing after anyway. But for me, the deal breaker was this flat structure here. Now, I've read some articles that said that the new look for model-driven apps is going towards more of a flat sitemap and less groups, less areas, that kind of thing. So I went and tried adjusting pretty much every setting that you can think of for adding the areas in here. Everything from changing some of the settings to obviously I've got these here and I've actually got areas and you'll see here, they're not here. And no matter what setting I adjusted, I couldn't get them to come back. Now there's probably a way to do this in the coding of the application. So when you build these, a lot of times it's building all that code while you're building out this plan. My theory right now, because I can't find a setting that will let me change this, is that there's something in the underlying coding of this. Even the sitemap shows that there should be areas and groups, and it doesn't actually render when you're inside of the app. So there's some kind of an issue between what you want here and what's being displayed here. And outside of just going and taking a look at maybe there's a coding approach that might fix this, and I didn't want to put the effort into this trying to fix it because I think that's way beyond the average user's capability anyway. So for me, if you're going to want sub areas and you're going to want the groupings of your different things, and not every app needs this. In this particular instance, I thought it was necessary visually as well as just a good way to interact with the app to have that kind of stuff. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be possible with the way that the AI creates these model-driven apps. Now, I have used the AI-generated plan before, and it has created the areas before. So I don't know if it was maybe because it was a much more complex app that I was looking for. In the previous examples I tried, it was a little bit easier of an app and it didn't actually need the areas. So I actually just added them and it was possible. But in this case, no matter what setting I went into the features, I tried turning off the new stuff. I tried turning off a whole bunch of different things, saving, publishing, and going back into the app. Nothing made a dent in the ability to add that. I went into the sitemap, I went everywhere, and could not find a way to do this. Feel free to leave a comment if there's something I might not have tried that maybe you had this particular problem and figured out what caused it or what the solution was to get it working for you. But what I wanted to do anyway was build out the app the way that I envisioned it looking and working as a separate app anyway. So for this particular video, it actually worked out pretty good. Now, ideally, it would have just been the way that I asked for, and I wouldn't have to do anything else. But I think it was a much better example of what does this look like versus what you would get if you just kind of built it yourself. And then maybe what there's a hybrid. Maybe you do part of it inside of the AI, and then you just do all the extra stuff afterwards. So we're going to talk about all of that also, but what did I want this to look like? So this is a little bit closer to what I was looking for. So you can see that we've got our groups over here. I actually haven't turned on areas yet, but I have the ability to turn on areas and I can actually display them if I want to. In this particular use case, this is going to be more of an app for me to use anyway. So it's not something that I have to worry about having admin and different people. I did ask for that as part of the plan is, hey, I want admins and I want business users so that we can kind of differentiate who can do what. Your business users can't typically update your tax categories, whereas admins, this would be an area that would be in the admin area. For ease and my use, I want to just have it on the main page here. But you can see I've got these groupings here where I can actually, collapse and expand out this stuff. Now, in the build that I asked for the mileage stuff, I said a vehicle and mileage rates because I want to be able to keep track of the rates by year. And then as I'm entering things by year, it will use whatever the mileage rate is for that year. So that's where I was looking for. Again, it created an entirely different table to keep track of all your mileage trips. I didn't see the relevance in doing something like that, so I just created this and I've got it all set up using the automations the way that I was looking for, where it'll actually pull the rate for this year and then update the record after I create it or modify it depending on what I'm doing with the record. So it'll keep everything in sync. So this is kind of what I was looking for. And if we go to the expenses, very similar to what the other app looks like. Really, the big difference between this app and the other one is just the ability to add the sub areas and the groupings. Now, what was the other thing I mentioned about the cascading effect and what that looks like? So if we go in here and create a new item, when I click on a category, I want to see all the items that are associated with this when I go to the subcategories. And the way it designed it, it didn't do that. So right now we're only seeing the options that are associated with this category. Again, that's a very easy feature to do. It seemed to be beyond the capabilities of the AI integration. Not a huge deal. You could always do this after, and in this case, all I did was do it after. So it's not something that you're not able to fix or can't use if you want to. as was the case with the groupings and the sub areas. It's just one of those limitations that seems to be there for right now, is that it can't do that. It's not going to be able to cascade, filter your different columns down. So just one of those things to be aware of. Now, some of the other functionality that I'd asked for in my plan that wasn't there is if I come over here and I select mileage, I want to be able to enter all that trip details in here. Again, this is just a business rule that you can set up in there. It wasn't able to create that, although I think it was, again, trying to go for a different approach using a separate table. But in that case, you would expect that the form would include the information for updating that. And all it had was the lookup. So the process for doing this entire thing was very clunky. You'd have to essentially create your expense, and then you got to go to your mileage table for the trips and add the trip in there. And then you got to go back in here, and then you got to use the lookup to that event. Not exactly a great user experience. I typically try to keep most of the information on the same screen whenever possible, either through an editable subgrid or through a form that just kind of separates out the information this way. So that was kind of a big miss on the design that I was asking for. The other thing I was pretty clear about is the ability to add a receipt or some sort of an invoice. So add an attachment of some sort. It created no mechanism for that. Now, I probably could have done that in the actual data model setup, but again, I had already asked for that and it completely missed that requirement. So I added that after the fact. Very easy to do as well. So again, a lot of this stuff is just customizations that you're going to want to do after you get it created. So if you're expecting to go in here and build your plan and get a finished product, that's probably not going to happen. Maybe when this matures a little bit more and it's got a little bit more capabilities into it, you'll get something like that, but don't expect to get exactly what you're looking for. Even with a very, again, like I said, very robust plan with a lot of information, I still did not get anywhere near that. So just kind of be aware of those limitations when you're trying to build these apps. The other thing I would mention is dashboards. I asked for a dashboard. I asked for different charts. So if I go to my expenses here, I was asking for some charts added in here as well. So it did not do those. That might be another limitation, again, that maybe it can't do those. But I do like having these visualizations right there. So if I wanted to kind of filter by the visualization, it's very easy to do that also. So I do like having that capability. And then also having some sort of a dashboard built for it as well. Again, this is a very basic dashboard. I wasn't asking for anything too crazy, just basic statistical information about my expenses and my revenues. Not really super complicated to do. Again, you could do this after the fact. So now what do I think? What is the overall suggestion? Who do I think this is for? Who do I think it's not for? If you're just getting into Power Apps and model-driven apps or Canvas apps, I think this is probably a good way to get into it because it is going to do a lot of the legwork for you, especially the table design and the table builds. It's going to do a lot of that. Just realize that you really have to dig into it and understand what it's trying to do, what you're trying to get out of it. And then if you're trying to build a really complex app, you might run into a lot of issues. It's great for building the tables, so it gets those tables going pretty well. But another issue with the tables, I don't typically change the name field, and all the name fields were a different name. So when I go looking later down the road, if I try to build like a Power BI or a Canvas app based off this information, I'm not going to be able to do my typical search for name and actually get the primary name column. So I'm going to have to look for, in this case, I believe it called it reference number. And again, it wasn't even an auto number, it was a text field, but it called that reference number for both the expense and the revenue, which I was actually okay with if they wanted to do an auto number, because in this kind of a build, you don't always have like a typical name column. Since it didn't really make a choice and it left it as text, I just renamed them reference name just for simplicity. And then I created an automation that puts information that I think is relevant, such as the date of the transaction and the payee or the customer. So that kind of information makes sense to me as far as the name for that particular item. So I kept it like that. But again, those are the kinds of things, if you're really experienced with building applications and you've kind of got your set way for doing things, you might want to not use the generative AI build a plan approach to building these apps, because it's not going to be set up the way that you're typically setting things up. How much time did it save? I would actually say it was about the same amount of time to draft up the plan, and then go through and kind of tweak things and fix things, and then also just put the customizations in there, had I just built the app from scratch to begin with. So I don't know if in my case that it saved me a lot of time to build the app this way. I spent a couple days doing the fine tuning and tweaking and kind of getting some stuff in there. So I spent a lot of time fixing things that weren't quite the way that I would normally do things. So if you're really attention to detail on how your apps are set up, you probably just want to build the app yourself. Not to say that you couldn't use the generative pages for a specific area of your app and be successful there, but I would say that for the underlying structure and the build out, you'll probably get to the end product a little bit quicker if you just build it yourself, especially as an experienced builder, than if you were to use the generative AI to do the entire process for you. So again, who do I think this is for? If you're brand new and you're building kind of a relatively easy, even to a moderate degree complexity, this is actually a fairly simple app. It only has a handful of tables. I've got some apps that have dozens of tables, so this is relatively small in terms of app design. But I would say, again, for those users, that's probably a great function. If you're an experienced app developer or you're used to a certain way of setting up your apps or you're building some pretty complex apps, you're probably not going to want to use the plan designer yet. It might get better in time, and then it'll be a better fit for whatever project you're putting at it. So that's my recommendation on how I would use this. I don't see myself using this very often because it seems very limited again on what it can do and how it would accomplish the things that it's trying to do. Well, I hope you found the video helpful. Until next time.